Today is June 19th, 2009. We're gathered at Augusta State University, Augusta, Georgia, as part of the World War II Oral History Project, and in conjunction with the Augusta Richmond County Historical Society, to hear the story of Dr. Thomas John Zwemer. I'm Jimmy Sharp, and I will facilitate the interview. Present with Dr. Zwemer and me are Mr. Fred Gailey, and our camera operator is Mr. David Evans. Dr. Zwemer, we certainly appreciate your time, your service to our country, and I'm real excited about exploring sharing your journey in life and your experiences in World War II. And so with that, sir, I'd like to begin with life before the war, your formative years. If you could tell us where you were born and where you were raised, and what was most influential, what experiences do you remember about growing up, the foundations of building Thomas Zwemer that we know today?
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I am a storyteller, and so if anybody asks to me to tell a story, they better have a good sensibility. I was born in Mishawaka, Indiana in 1925 so that I could be very near my mother. My father was a building contractor prior to the Big Depression. He built usually upper middle class homes for executives for Bendix Corporation, Studebaker, a place like that. Of course, when the crash came, the building pretty much stopped. But before that crash, he bought a gentleman's farm just outside of Berrien Springs, Michigan, which was 3.5 or 4 miles from a Bible college that he and my mother had attended, and they met and married. And so with no building going on, he became a farmer, and he wanted his children to be raised in a Christian environment. And so my brother and 2 sisters and I, from at least the 3rd grade on, were trained all the way through college in a Christian environment. I worked on the college farm, and as well as our own. I used to milk 4 cows morning and night before going to school and after school. For a short period of time, my dad left the farm and went to Pound, Wisconsin to build a bank building for my mother's brother, who really owned the town. He had the mercantile company, the bank, and a farm. And he was a bachelor and quite proud of it and made quite a bit good advantage of it. I think he knew every single telephone operator in 3 counties.
Now, is this Uncle Roy?
This was Uncle Roy, and Uncle Roy, of course, for his status, owned a LaSalle convertible that was maroon. And I was now maybe 4.5, 5 years of age, and I was in a kindergarten stage in a public school in Pound, and I walked over and he was waxing the car. And so he gave me a cloth and let me help him wax it. When he finished waxing it, he said, "Do you want to take a ride?" I said, "Sure." So I get in his LaSalle, and he drives 2 miles to Coleman. And there's a bachelor owner and sales manager of the Chevrolet garage. And those 2 guys were buddies when they would go out romancing the girls. And so he went in to talk to Gus. And he said, "Don't you touch a thing, and I'll be right back." Well, he wasn't right back. And he didn't ask if I had to go to the bathroom. He didn't ask if they just don't touch anything. And it was a hot summer day. And I waited and I waited. My bladder kept getting fuller and fuller. I can't touch anything. I can't get out. I can't blow the horn. I can't do anything. And finally I couldn't hold anymore, so I peed on his plush carpet. Well, in that heat, with the windows closed in that convertible, when he opened the door, kapoom, the smell hit him. And of course, he didn't like it a little bit, so we made that 2 miles back to Pound in short order. And he saw my dad and he wanted my dad to punish me for peeing on his carpet. My dad said, "Did you ask if he had to go?" "No." "Were you gone just a couple of minutes or a long time?" "Well, it was longer than I thought." He said, "If you told him not to touch anything and he had to go, he did the best thing he can. I can't punish him for that." Years later, after I got out of the Army, my dad and I were working on a building in Massachusetts, and he said, "Remember that, LaSalle?" I said, "Sure do, Dad." He said, "I wanted to do that my whole life."
Now you learned some other lessons from your Uncle Roy with
Yeah,
regards to
well,
the value of hard work.
Well,
Seed potatoes and mustard weeds.
The potato story is the best. He owned the potato warehouse, and his farm, the three crops that he had on this farm was dairy, potatoes, and there was a large hill from a glacial deposit of pure gravel. So he sold gravel to the county, and he sold milk to the big dairy, and he sold potatoes. Oh, and he also owned the pickle warehouse. He sold cucumbers to Heinz. Well, it was potato planting time. My brother and I now were in the second grade, he in the third, and he put us in this warehouse, and there was a room maybe 1/3 the size of this room, full of potatoes, and a scale, and 2 little benches, and 1 little drop light with a 60-watt bulb in it. And we got 2 or 3 cents 100 pounds. We couldn't lift 100 pounds. So we would get a sack for as full as we could get it, about 55 or 60 pounds, drag it to the scale, weigh it, and make a tally. Well, we did that for about a week until potatoes were gone. And so we took our tally down to Uncle Roy, who was managing his general store, and we gave him the chip that we had counted. It was about $3.40 worth of potato cutting. $3.40, he said, "That's too much money for 2 little boys." He gave us a quarter each and a package of Wrigley Spearmint gum. He says, "Now have a good day." And that was it. Well, we knew we'd been had, but what were we going to do? Well, a number of years ago, maybe 12, 14 years ago, we got a letter from Kellogg Banking from Green Bay, Wisconsin, saying that we were one of 300 and some heirs to a fortune of $400 and some thousand, and they wanted to verify that we were entitled to this money, Uncle Roy having passed away and not leaving a will. So we sent back the necessary papers. In about 6 or 8 months, we each got a check for $97, I think. It was a little under 100. So I called up my brother. I said, "Did you get a check from Kellogg's?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How much was it?" He's $97. I said, "That's what mine was." I said, "We finally got paid for the potatoes." He said, "Hardly." So that was the other story was he sent us out to his farm to pull mustard weed. And mustard weed is a very easy plant to pull, a very poor root system that grows taller in the hayfield, and it has a little tiny yellow blossom. He said, "You go out and pull the weeds." And he said, "The foreman of the farm will tell you which field." So he said, "So many fields down the lane." So we count the fields, and we come to a field of yellow clover, just maybe 5, 8 acres of solid yellow. And we get on and try to pull. We couldn't pull. We both got on one. We could just break it off. So we marched back up to see the foreman. He laughed. He said, "It's the next field down." So we went to the next field down, and sure enough, scattered here and there was some yellow mustard, and we could just pull it up, and all we had to do was pull it up and throw it down. And then we had to walk back the 3.5 miles back to town, and we'd get back to town and said, "We finished." And Uncle Roy said, "Can't pay you to see how well you did, but I'm too busy to go now." So a week later, he said, "Okay, let's go out and see how you did on the mustard." Well, by that time, a whole new crop of mustard had bloomed up. And of course, it's got yellow all over the field. He said, I ain't gonna pay for such a poor job as this. And I said, well, these are new mustard plants. They were just not in bloom. We couldn't tell a mustard plant unless it was blooming. No way, no more. He says, I'll bring you out another time. He had to get permission from the folks before he could let us stay home. So we never went back. I think he put the cows in the pasture and they just ate it up. But so we worked one full day for nothing and another week about for a quarter and a package of gum. We got quite a kick out of Uncle Roy. We have lots of stories on him.
There are lots of stories in your book, and we'll talk about your book a little bit later about Uncle Roy. But you also learned a lesson while you were very young about never quitting. And can you can you tell us a story while you were in school when you were learning to play some music, a musical instrument, and what the William Tell Overture means to you today?
Well, my mother owned a piano, and she was an excellent pianist. And my older brother took piano lessons, and he could learn the piano. And so I was to learn the piano, and they had dun 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 dun. That's sissy stuff. I couldn't do it. So I quit. I took 4 lessons, and I said, this isn't for me. So I get into high school, what they called the academy, and the band director and music director came through. I think it was the English class. In recruiting, he says, I lost my bass viol player. Can anyone play the bass viol? And nobody raised their hand. He said, would anyone like to learn to play the bass viol? I said, no, that's a man's instrument, So I put on my hand, I'll play that. He said, great. He said, if you don't know how to play, I can start you from scratch. Now this is September. So I go on and I learn to play. I could play the little ditties, and stuff. And then when I wasn't practicing, I learned how to slap it a little bit to get a little rhythm. And some of the kids kind of enjoyed my boogieing around a bit. And of course, I didn't mind the attention. But then he pulled that we were going to have a concert. And the second half of the concert was going to be the William Tell Overture. I don't know if you know the William Tell Overture, but the last movement is the Lone Ranger theme. Well, all of that is bowing. And you try to bow with that, and you go on that. I couldn't do it. I had no way. So what I did is I put the bow down, and I could slap it that fast. And this was during practice. He put the baton down. He says, Tom, what in the world are you doing? And I said, I can't bow that fast, Maestro. And he said, well, you'll learn by the time this was maybe Thanksgiving, and we're going to have this at a Christmas program. That isn't much time. But I was too dumb to quit ahead of time, so I get up and I get through the first half with simple songs, and I made a few mistakes. The second half, the William Tell Overture. 450 people approximately in the audience, at least 400. Everyone knew more about the bass viol, I'm sure, than I did. And I was just hopelessly lost, and I was binging. And one of the fellows in there was a bass viol player in the college, and he was in the audience. And it was over there, he came up, he said, Tom, you had a little bit of trouble there, didn't you? I sure did. I put that bass viol down right on the orchestra floor, walked away, and that's the last. I still can't listen to the William Tell Overture without blushing.
That's a great story. Now, you had some wonderful tales in your book regarding your brother and your sisters. Would you like to reflect upon one or two of those?
Well, the one where Uncle Roy came in to be a hero of sorts. We lived about 150 feet from the Milwaukee Road main line railroad that went from Chicago to Minneapolis. And there were 2 passenger trains a day and maybe 5 or 6 freights. And sometimes, and the siding went right past our house, and the bank was about as high as a gondola car would be. So if we were in the backyard, we'd be looking straight at the top of a gondola car. We also built in a large maple tree that was right next to the bank a kind of a Tarzan house and a rope ladder. My brother takes the rope ladder apart, makes a lasso out of it, and for some dumb reason takes the other end of the lasso and ties it around his waist. And now there's a freight car with a freight train is on the siding in order for a passenger train to go through. The passenger train goes through, and so they start up to, the freight train to get back on the main line, and my brother throws the lariat, the lasso, and one of the gondola cars was wooden, was filled with big riprap rock. And as they dumped this rock in, they had split one of the pieces of wood, and the piece of wood is sticking up, and he catches the lasso on that. And now, of course, he's being pulled along by the train and being pulled down the hill right towards the wheels. And my sister was 3 years younger than I, and I were right there, and so we ran down, and we would try to pull him up the bank. We'd almost get to the top of the bank when the pull of the train would carry us on. And about 80 feet down the line, it was all brambles, and that's where the septic tank from my uncle's house nearby emptied, and so it was full of drainage from that and everything. We're thinking getting chewed up by the wheels or getting chewed up by the brambles and getting full of discharge. We're screaming our heads off, and then there are 4 or 5 other kids screaming and running around. My dad was about 2 blocks away attending the family store, and he said, "That much screaming, it must be my kids." So he runs out to the front of the store, sees a bicycle, jumps on the bicycle, and trying so hard and having not ridden a bike before, he fell off 3 times getting up to the house. Uncle Roy was taking a nap. He ran down from the house, saw what was happening, but he's so nervous he can't get the jackknife blade open. And by that time, the brakeman, hearing all that noise, said, "That must have something to do with my train." So he signaled the engineer to stop the train, and we were maybe 15 feet from the brambles, when the train stopped, and then they all came. My dad was there, my mother was there, Uncle Roy was there, the brakeman was there, and pretty soon the fireman and the engineer were there, and they got my brother all untied and the thing loose. But after that, whenever that team on the train would come by the Zwemer house, we'd get an extra toot-toot.
That's great. Your mother and father were very important to you as you were growing up.
Yes. My father, both my mother and father were quite religious, and they wanted us to be trained in a Christian environment. My dad was raised as a Dutch reformer. He was Holland Dutch. And my mother was trained as a Roman Catholic. But when they were in probably high school age, about 15 or 16, both of their mothers were converted to Seventh-day Adventism. And so they, of course, at that teenage, went with their parents. And so this Bible college in southern Michigan, it's still there, it's now called Andrews University, and quite a prestigious institution, was a place that said, this is where we want our children to be trained. Well, about that time was about the time that Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. And now we were getting despots. We had communism in Russia with a dictator. We had Mussolini coming on. And then right after that, the Spanish Civil War came on, in which Germany now was under Hitler. And Hitler is supporting one side, and his pilots are learning dive bombing over in Spain, and the communists were sending theirs. And Americans were on the side of the communists. They had the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, if you may remember that. Well, I was now just transitioning from grade school into the academy, and so the college said that in all communities and countries there are Christians. So we don't want to be killing Christians. So what we're going to do is train our young people to be medics, combat medics, and so they establish a kind of an ROTC program, so that it was like ROTC without any weapons. So we would right shoulder litters, for example, but we did all the close order drill and all the bandaging and all the field kind of work that you do as first aid. And I became a sergeant in that group. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, I was still in high school level or academy level, and I thought, we'd wipe them out in 90 days or less, and so it wouldn't be much. But I continued my medical cadet, we called the medical cadet corps. But I also, by that time, had graduated from farm work to being a clerk in the college store, which was a bookstore, a grocery store, and a sandwich shop. And my main job was behind the sandwich counter to make sandwiches and milkshakes. Well, I finished high school, and when I finished high school, I finished almost all of my prenatal training in college. So much so I was accepted into dental school if I finished organic chemistry. That's all I really lacked, was I was in organic chemistry, but I hadn't finished it. So although my brother, a year older, was already in dental school and should have been called up, by the draft before me, the chairman of the draft board of our little elected not. He and my father were not particularly friendly. My father had to testify against the chairman of the draft board on the automobile accident in which the pharmacist, chairman of the board, was found guilty of manslaughter, but not given any time. And my dad testified against him. So anyway, if my brother had been drafted, the Army would have paid his way through dental school, and he would have gone into the Army for the Korean War. So they drafted me, and so we made arrangements. We had friends in the Army. The closest one was a major in the MPs. That I would be sent to medical basic. When I finished medical basic under the ASTP program, I would go to dental school. So the day before I have to report, I'm still working at the soda fountain. So I had a tablet, a lined tablet, and on the side of the tablet I put down 15 or 20 minute intervals. I forget just exactly how long. And then when the co-eds would come in to say goodbye, Tommy, and we were going to miss you, I'd say, a soda fountain isn't the right place to say goodbye. I said, I made up this list, and it's in time, and if you just sign up for 8:30 to 8:40, we'll meet underneath the big maple tree between the administration building and the chapel, and we can say goodbye properly. So all of the girls, they signed up, Of course, I never showed up. It was just a joke. Until I got down to Fort Benning, Georgia, in infantry basic. One of the co-eds wrote, "Dear Tommy, I had from 9:15 to 9:30, and you never showed up. I waited till 10 o'clock. Where in the world were you? And I said, somebody taught
Somebody
me.
was infatuated with you. Well, this is a good point, Dr. Zwemer. I think to transition from civilian life into your military life. You already mentioned basic training here, and
Yep.
you talked about your intent and the initial intent of the Army to send you on to dental school, but that never
It
occurred.
didn't happen. I was inducted into Camp Custer, which was outside of Battle Creek, Michigan. But the Army was closing Camp Custer, so I was in the last group of inductees. And so they kept us longer at Camp Custer, long enough for us to load up all the consumable supplies and everything. And then they shipped all these supplies and us to Fort Sheridan, Illinois. But they had processed us at Camp Custer, and I had received the highest score on their aptitude test that day. A little Jewish boy and I were the highest they had at that camp at that time. But we were, because of the high score, we were automatically slated for engineering college. But before you could go to engineering school, you had to go through basic. So when you get to Fort Sheridan, now they have to get everything settled and arranged with all of the upset between the two camps. So I was there for a little longer, and finally we were shipped out, and 14 of us were picked out, and a major was in charge of this detachment that we were in, and his lieutenant picked up my folder and looked and showed the major that I was supposed to go to medic, and I was a 1AO, fully able to be a combat person, but objecting to carrying a weapon. And the major said, So I got sent to infantry basic in Fort Benning, Georgia. And I don't know whether it was 16 weeks or something like that. It was 13 or so, I forget exactly in those days. It was at least 13-week basic. My corporal quit school in the 4th grade. And so it was an entirely new experience for me. I soon learned what we now call passive aggression. But I spent almost the entire basic training, infantry training, except firing a weapon. They allowed me that, so I did everything else, infiltration course. They shipped me back to Camp Grant, Illinois, which was the medic basic training. And I go through medic basic, and I'm in the last week or 2 weeks before the end of basic, I come down with the mumps. So I'm shipped in the hospital, and they was required to be in the hospital 28 days. And that was a full incubation period, even though I seemed well within about 14 or 15 days. So I missed out, so they started me back at the beginning. So I went through the 3rd basic was a winner. I finished that basic. And by that time, of course, the dental school had started, so there was no way that I could enter dental school in the middle of a year. Mm-hmm. So they sent me to dental technician training in Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis. And I took 4 months of that and returned to Camp Grant, Illinois. And I was there 4 or 5 days, and I get a call from the base commander to visit him. Now, he was a 1-star general, as I recall. I said, what in the world would he want with me, you know? I said, my mother or my father must have died, or, I mean, there must be something big for a base commander to call a private in. I couldn't think of anything I'd done wrong. So he got it. He was very pleasant. I did the best military courtesy that I knew how at the time. But he made me at ease and said, "Come in, son." He said, "Sit down next to my desk." So he sat down. And he said, "I want to apologize." He said, "The Army really screwed you up, didn't they?" And I said, "Well, it's not what I expected." He said, "Well, I'll tell you the story you don't know anything about." He said, the Secretary of the Army closed ASTP as of January 1. So I arranged with 5th Army in Chicago to have you report to dental school on December 27th to beat the deadline. And he said, our camp agreed, 5th Army agreed, we had to send it to the Pentagon for them to agree, and some lieutenant up said, "Who in the world starts a dental school between Christmas and New Year's?" So he calls up the University of Illinois, and some secretary answers. He said, "When is the next class of dental school starting?" He said, "January 3. He said, "I thought so." Denied. He said, so the general said, "Son, the only thing I can do is send you to the South Pacific." He said, "with my apologies." I said, "Well, I want to thank you, sir." I said, "I had no idea that anyone was ever even looking out after me or trying to." I said, "But you did the best. I'll go." So I got to the South Pacific in time to get MacArthur back to Manila.
Well, let's talk one more incident, one more vignette related to some of your initial training. Now, because of your 3-course basic training scenario, you became quite the expert at the infiltration course, did you not?
I always, every time I went through, I got at least that far. And so it was awful noisy, as you know, but quite safe. But at Camp Grant, Illinois, they had just before you entered the infiltration area, they had a mound with a cross on it. And on the top of the cross, it said, "Private Head Up, Butt Up, may he rest in peace." You know, I mean, it was just a joke. Well, the night before we were supposed to go through the infiltration course, I had an awful lot of friends come and start asking me about where I was from and this. I was taking a correspondence course in English literature, and I was reading my Bible at night. And so I'd get all kinds of hoots. I mean, these guys were reading novels and whatever, and playing cards, and I was studying either English or the King James Bible. So I didn't have any I had a kind of a lonesome corner. Until that night, and all of a sudden they're all over there, and then they're showing me pictures of their wives or their girlfriends and asking me. Finally, they get around to the real question. "We heard that you've been through the infiltration course." I said, "Yeah, I've been." And he said, "Right. Well, tell us about it." I said, "Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's very, very noisy. They're trying to get you used to being able to think and act in the presence of noise, a kind of noise that could hurt you. So there are 30 caliber machine guns going off all the time, and then they have pits where they have explosives, large firecrackers that would blow up every once in a while, and barbed wire entanglements, and you had to crawl up on your belly to an entanglement, then flip over on your back and go underneath the wire, and then turn back over until you go through. And it was, I'd say, about 50 yards. It wasn't 100 yards. It was maybe 35 to 50 yards of noise and wire. So one fellow, I was, of course, still 18, even after all this time. And I think I just turned 19. One fellow that was about 26, so I considered him an old man, and he was married, and he showed me his kids. He says, "Tom, do you mind if I march beside you and go up beside you?" I said, "Sure, but why?" He said, "Well, you're such a good man. the Lord isn't going to let anything happen to you, and I'm sure that he'll protect a wide margin. I said, I don't think it works that way, but I said, sure, you can go in. So lo and behold, we march up, and we get to the thing where it says, "Private, head up, butt up, may he rest in peace." And my buddy lost it. He was just a bundle of nerves. We march into the trench, and wouldn't you know it, we're in the front line. We're the first over the top of the group. And he's right next to me on my right. And it's over the top we go, and we crawl a few yards to the first wire. He gets to the first wire, and he freezes. He will not move. He will not turn over. He says, "Stay with me, Tom, stay with me." And so I stayed with him for a little while, trying to encourage him. I said, "But I can't stay with you because they already think I'm a sissy because I won't carry a rifle, you know. And so I have to go on." So I go on all the way through and stand up on the other side, and he's still yelling, "Tom, Tom, come get me." So I get down and I crawl all the way back under and get up to him. I said, "Now just follow me. Just do exactly as I say, you'll be all right." He wouldn't move. And so I said, "I can't stay here because they're still going to say." So I crawl back through the second time through. Then they turned all the machine guns off, and a couple of non-coms walk over and lifted them off the ground and put them in an ambulance, and we all the rest of us marched on back.
So now you've completed basic training. You know you're going to go to the South Pacific.
Right.
What are your thoughts at that particular time as you go into California before preparation to depart to the Pacific?
It was interesting. They had to wait for transport to the South Pacific, and for some reason or other, our group was scheduled to go on the maiden voyage of a new attack transport. And so they were having shakedown cruises with this new ship. And so we were held at Camp Beale, California, just outside of Sacramento, for several weeks. Well, during that period of time, there were forest fires up at Mount Shasta, and we were sent up there to fight forest fires. Then the peach crop came in, and they didn't have enough workers, so they gave us a pass every morning to go in and can peaches. And then after the peach canning season, they gave us a weekend pass. And you could go as far, we could go far as from Camp Beale to San Francisco. And so I went into Marysville and got a Greyhound bus to go in with a buddy and I to go into San Francisco for a weekend. And so we get aboard the bus, and we get on to a seat right behind two young girls. He had the window and I had the aisle. Now the bus stopped even along the highway for people waiting for the bus, and so they were maybe 5 miles out of Marysville when they stopped the bus, and a young woman put a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years of age, up on the top, and then she climbed up, and he looks down, and he sees a tall, skinny, black-haired soldier on the aisle, and he runs down the aisle, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and jumps up into my lap, and of course everybody's laughing about this, and she comes down the aisle and sits right across from me and apologized. She said, "We're going to visit my husband down at Camp Roberts." He says, and my son, every time he sees a tall, thin soldier, he thinks it's his dad. And I said, I'm honored. And so everybody is playing with the kid and all. And all of a sudden, one of the girls turned around and said, "Where are you dog faces going?" I said, "San Francisco." And they said, "Where are you spending the night?" And this is as loud so the whole bus can hear, you know. And I said, "At the YMCA." You know, and my buddy said, "What did you say that for? What did you say that for?" I said, "That's because that's where we're going to stay, you know." But I should have said, "We haven't the foggiest idea. What do you suggest, you know?" I mean, if you're going to be an army man, you might as well ask the right questions. But I had no intention of getting involved. So he was angry. So we go to the Y and it's full. Then we found the cots at the USO. Well, then I spent the weekend. I went to see the Golden Gate. I went to see Golden Gate Park, and I went down to Fisherman's Wharf, and all, I mean, rode the cable cars. I mean, you did everything that you do in San Francisco, except where you're going to sleep at night. So we get the same bus back. This fellow and I get the same bus back, and he wouldn't say a word to me. You know, about 80 miles, 75 or 80 mile trip. We get back to the barracks, and the guy said, "Well, how was it? How did it go?" He said, "It was my dumb luck to go with Zwemer."
Okay, so now you're on transport to New Britain, where you're going to marry up with the 40th Infantry Division out of California, the Sunburst Division, and you're assigned to D Company 115 Medical Battalion. Is that correct?
Right.
Oh, do you have any experiences with regards to your transit from
Well,
the West Coast to New Britain?
We got into a repo depot in New Guinea, and we were there 2 or 3 weeks until they get an assignment. And then we got on a LCI, a convoy of 4 of them to go up to New Britain, which is an overnight trip. And it was just calm, beautiful moonlight. It was just beautiful. But we were in a bay area. We didn't realize that when we got into the real ocean, it would get pretty choppy for a little landing craft. Excuse me. I was lying down. I put my bunk, not bunk, what do you call it? Hammock across the bow, you know, just, and I was laying there, you know, looking up at the stars, just being rocked to sleep, and all of a sudden we had heavy water, and the bow goes down, and a wave comes over, and this is a waterproof thing. I'm just floating in a tub of salt water, and I said, "Who in the world did that?" And the second one, boom. Then I realized what happened. So I get up and dump the water out and try to wring out my clothes and put them back on. And then I was wandering around the deck, and there was a little Japanese boy on board, and they're holding a bandage to his head. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I was lying on the deck, and they had a whole stack of food, cartons of food." And he said, when they hit the waves, the top carton fell off and hit me on the forehead, and it made a triangular gash on his forehead. And I said, "Well, I'm a medic. If you let me, anybody have any Scotch tape?" I don't know if I had any or not. I said, "Well, I made a little butterfly." And then I put it on that, and then I put a little Band-Aid on that. And that was that. Not knowing that months later I'd run into him again. But when I get to the 40th Infantry Division, 115th Battalion, I was a dental technician. And the company commander said, "We already got one of those. We don't need any more. You're now a medic." And he said, "I'm assigning you to Kelly. He's our best medic, and you learn from him." We were loading at that time. It was after Thanksgiving, and we invaded Luzon on the 9th of January. So we were loading to get into a convoy to go up to Luzon. So I didn't have any chance to get trained until we hit the beaches in Luzon. But the Japanese found that the beaches at Luzon were at Lingayen Gulf were totally indefensible. And so they retreated 3 to 4 miles. So our landing was a cakewalk. It was no problem. The interesting thing about it, it was the first time I made what we called an assault landing. And I was 6 feet tall, and a major in our outfit, a physician, was just barely 5 feet tall. And so he said to me and to another guy that was 6 feet tall, he says, "Do you mind, and when we hit the beach, that I be between the two of you?" in case the water is deep, your guys will be above water and you can pull me up. And so, sure enough, we hit a sandbar. They put the ramp down. We were the first 3 off the ramp down, and the water's up to here on me. And I look, and I can't find the major. And they go, where's the major? Yep. We go down. We pull him up by the shoulder. He sputters and he says, "Thanks, fellas." And so we carried him about 4 or 5 paces until we hit sand again. But I had one good major on my side.
Right. Now, how about your feelings and your thoughts at that time? I mean, you've never been in combat before. You're a medic. You're not. You've elected not to carry a weapon of any sort by trade.
Right.
What are your thoughts as you get ready to assault the bay?
Well,
I mean, you didn't know. You didn't have the information that the Japanese were not going to be there.
I said, one thing, I ain't going to be the scaredest guy that gets ashore. Everybody on this boat's scared, even though I aren't going to admit it, and I'm scared. But nobody's going to know it but the Lord and me. You know, I'm going ashore. The other guys have done it many times before. I'm going ashore as a man. And whatever the Lord has in store for me is all right with me. But I'm not going to make a fool of myself or make the Lord look bad. I'm going ashore as a man. And that was the way I looked at it at the time. We get ashore, and it's as quiet as this. But the first thing after we got our hospital set up, they said, you've got to dig foxhole perimeter. Well, like this, who wants to dig a foxhole perimeter? There are no needs, but the rule was dig your foxhole. So I get out my little shovel and start digging. I get down about that far and I hit water. And the guy said, "Hey, Tom, scaredy cat, know what you going to do now?" I said, well, I guess instead of a foxhole, I'm going to build a slit trench down to water, and I'm going to put up all of the sand and muck towards the enemy, and then I'll lay down. I'll be 6 feet long, or what it needs to be, and I think that that much muck and sand will stop small arms fire if it should happen. All of a sudden, a Jap Zero comes over. And of course, I'm ready to dive into my slit trench, and the guy that's hawing the loudest is already in it. And I'm lying on top of the dirt, he's lying down in the water, and our noses are about this close together. I said, you know, if we live through this, I suggest you keep your mouth shut. Yeah, okay. I says, and dig your own hole. Yeah, okay. that was our first introduction to war. Yeah. But we then saw the Navy shoot down the Zero. Actually, the Zero was trying to get the hell out of there. Actually.
Now, prior to Luzon on New Britain, as I recall, the 40th Infantry Division was relieved by the Australians. Do you ever have any prior experiences with international soldiers before? Just
a casual, like nothing official. They talk different, you know, and they dress different, but nothing. But their food was absolutely terrible. They had number 10 cans of carrots, for example, and potatoes and asparagus. And I think that canned carrots is what I remember about. You could boil a branch of a southern pine tree for the length they boiled that carrot, and it would be softer and tastier than those carrots. And we were being fed on board that ship that food day after day after day. So finally, we complained enough that the chef, the cook said, "I'll tell you what I'll do for you. I'll make a dinner for the captain out of the same food I'm cooking for you and see what he says. So he did. And the captain of the ship teacher, he said, what kind of stuff is this? He says, that's what I've got to feed the men. You got to feed the men and you're going to go into battle with that kind of stuff? He said, throw it overboard. And so one of his officers says, you can't do that because the stuff may spoil in the sun and float, and the submarines could track us. Mm-hmm. He said, well, then take a meat cleaver and chop a hole in each end, and then throw it overboard, can by can. So we'd carry up a caseload of this stuff with a cleaver and hit both ends overboard, and 24 cans in a case, you know, all day long, until we got it all overboard. Mm-hmm. But another experience, we had a fella on our outfit, we called him Ironhead Reeves. Ironhead, we were told in New Britain, if you're outside, wear a helmet at all times, because we're under coconut palms, and a coconut palm, if it hits you on the head, could kill you. Well, he's walking from his tent to the latrine without a helmet, and a coconut palm hits him square in the top of the head. It knocks him to the ground, it knocked him out, actually. And we picked him up, and he's coming to. Are you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. He said, I got a headache. He said, I'm all right. After that, he was known as Ironhead Reeves. He hated commission officers with a passion. So when we're going from Panay to Korea, we were put aboard a destroyer escort. And they asked for volunteers to serve the officers' mess. And primarily they were to serve coffee. And he volunteered. We said, why, you hate officers. Why in the world would you want to serve the officers? He says, someday it's going to be rough. And that day someone's going to want coffee. And I know an SOB who's going to get a whole pot of coffee down the back of his neck, you know. And so one day it gets a little turbulent, and he came down the gangway. He said, I did it. I said, what'd you do? He said, so-and-so got a pot of coffee down his back. I said, what happened? He said, they fired me. But I did what I wanted to do.
That's a great story. Let's get back to 3 months' time on the peninsula, Luzon Peninsula. There's a couple of vignettes that I believe are relevant to describing you and your story. You were to triage NCOIC?
Yeah,
is that correct?
I would triage. They put me in charge of triage. That was where new wounded or injured or sick people would come in, and we'd see who would need treatment the most urgent. And of course there was also a surgeon or a physician there. And it was very quiet. The 1st Cavalry had taken over. They had gone through our lines, and we were at Clark Field, and that was as far as we got to Manila. And the 1st Cavalry then took credit for liberating Manila, which was fine with us. But an ambulance came in with 2 Japanese soldiers that had been captured by Filipino guerrillas. And those guerrillas had taken bamboo poles or sticks and beat them from one end to the other. They were black and blue, their eyes were closed, their nose was bleeding, and their mouth was stuck. All arms were, wherever you could see, it was bruised. And so this major started examining. When he got to the legs, he started twisting the legs like that, which they had been bruised, and even though these Japs were bruised, they were still conscious, and you could see them wince every time you do that. And so I said, Major, what in the world are you doing? He said, I'm checking for fractures. I said, well, Major, we don't check our men that way. And he says, if it wasn't for these SOBs, he said, I'd be back in the Bronx making a damn good living. I said, well, Major, they're just as much as victims of this war as you and I are. I said, if you want to twist on somebody's leg, get a hold of Tojo. Tojo. He said, you're out of order, soldier. And of course, I shut up. But he quit. He quit. Later, when we were going to Panay, we were, instead of landing on a landing craft, they shoved a LST right up to the shore and opened it, and they had vehicles they went on, and behind all the vehicles they had 105 ammo. Now 105 is a self-contained shell. It's like a big bullet. It's got a casing in the shell, and it weighed about 75 pounds. Well, we were given it. Our company was divided in 2 platoons. On Luzon, we were the first platoon ashore, and they were held in reserve. So this time we were held in reserve, and they were the first ones ashore. And so they gave us the job as soon as they cleared the palm trees of snipers. They gave us the job of carrying 105 shells up 100 yards or so up the bank and making cordwood, and we started, maybe there's 8 or 10 of us as a squad, with one shell. We were stripped to the waist, one shell on our shoulder, up, put it down. Well, we started, let's say, around 10:30 in the morning, and around 8 or so the next morning, we're still going. And they hadn't taken one shell out of that pile. So we figured, you know, the war must be going pretty well for us, and one shell more or less ain't going to make that much difference. And so we were going pretty slow. We were pretty tired. The same major came out onto a catwalk, and they had little cabins up there for the officers to sleep in. He came out on the catwalk and saw us going, creeping along, at least according to his estimation, and he yells to Chief. Chief was an Apache Indian Mexican, and he was 6'2" or 3", weighed 240 pounds of muscle. He had been a professional wrestler before he got it. I saw him in a fight in one of our tents one time, hit one of the other soldiers, and that soldier landed in the second cot. He just went, and that was, so he yelled, of all the people, and he could have yelled at me, and I'd just walk faster, you know, but not Chief. Chief looks up at the major. He said, were you speaking to me, sir? He said, yes, you. He said, if you don't shut up, I'm coming up here with this 105 shell and sticking it up your ass. Just then, our company commander, who was also a major, but outranked him in time of service and all, and position, the major said, I want him court-martialed, I want him court-martialed. And of course, the company commander knew how long we had been there, and said, that is your right, Major, that's absolutely your right. But if I were you, and I didn't want 105 shell up my ass, he said, I'd get off this catwalk. That'd be the, boy, Chief, we're for you.
Now, this same major, and you're gonna.